everyone, welcome. My name is Catherine Myers and I will be the host for this TLC session, Exploring New C's, Creating Engaging Guidances in the Online Classroom, presented by Dr. Adam Gutschmidt. We're really stoked that you are here with us. I think Adam's going to have a lot of great information. We will be keeping the chat open during the session, so please feel free to participate and ask questions. And without further ado, take it away, Adam.
Thanks, Catherine, and hello, everyone. Thank you for taking your time out of your day to join me for this presentation here. I hope all of you will find it useful. As Catherine mentioned, chat will be open. I'll primarily be speaking and keeping on time with my presentation here, but if I do see an important question during the middle of things, I'll do my best to try to answer it, but for the most part, we'll save all questions until the end. So let's go ahead and get started here. As Catherine mentioned, my presentation is called Exploring New C's, Creating Engaging Guidances in an Online Classroom. And really today what we're looking at is the guidance feature, the guidance portion of the online classroom and the ways that we can make an effort to make it more engaging for students. So as far as the purpose of this presentation goes, I'm sure as many of you are aware, one of the biggest focuses that we have here at Ashford right now is on retention issues and making sure our students are staying inside the classroom. And we're looking at all sorts of different avenues in which to accomplish this. And for me, one of the most interesting things to look at was the guidance aspect of the course and how we can make that a little bit more dynamic in order for students to find it useful, to learn more about the subject matter that's being taught, and to ultimately stay in the classroom. And so I want to really begin to look at what communication skills can be used in order to maximize the value that the weekly guidance can offer inside the classroom. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with the concept of the 7 C's of effective communication, but this is a concept that dates back all the way to the 1950s and has gone through changes and additions and revisions throughout time. The 7 C's that I'm using here comes from the Handbook of Journalism and Mass Communication. What these 7 C's are is a guideline for making sure the way you communicate with others is effective and clear. The goal of communication is always to have a shared meaning of message between the two parties that are communicating. So the 7 C's that are established, or at least as defined by the Handbook of Journalism and Mass Communication, include being credible in your communication. So, not that you're not lying, that you have credibility and are seen as credible by the listener or the audience. The context of the communication, making sure that it makes sense within the context that you're speaking. That your communication is clear and understood by the person who's listening. That the content is worthwhile and is understood by the audience. That you are consistent in your communication and don't make things confusing for the audience. That you're using the right channel in order to get your message across to the audience. And lastly, the capability of the audience. So do they have the ability to understand the message that you're trying to speak to them? If you use these 7 C's, the logic behind is that you will be effective in your communication with others. But what we find now, especially in our modern technological age, is that necessarily isn't always going to be enough in order to be effective with your communication. So you may find that when you are communicating with your students, particularly when you create your guidance, you are following those 7 C's and yet it's not enough. Students either aren't learning or retaining the information, or they're not even bothering to read the guidance in the first place. So even if you use the 7 C's, it may not be enough. The goal should be, when creating guidance or really any content in your course, you want to make sure that your students are opening it, reading it, and most importantly, being able to remember it. So with that in mind, what I'm doing in my presentation here today is proposing some additional C's of communication that you should use when thinking about how you go about creating your guidance. So we're going to set sail for some new C's here today and hopefully have these C's be useful for you when creating your guidance. And specifically, we're going to be focusing on 4 new C's. Those C's are going to be creativity, closeness, connection, and camera. And my reasoning and decision behind proposing these 4 C's is twofold. One is to reflect, as I mentioned before, our sort of modern era. Now that we have new technologies available to us, there are additional aspects of communication that weren't necessarily considered when the original 7 C's of communication were developed. So with that in mind, I want to try to focus on that. Secondly, I also want to focus specifically on the particular format and layout of our online classroom and try to think of things specific to the space that you're using inside your classroom to make that as effective as possible. So with that said, let's take a look a little bit more closely at these 4 C's and how you can use them to create hopefully more effective guidance for your classroom. First, we'll begin with creativity. And what you want to do is make use of the visual medium that you're using. Our online classroom is one that does not necessarily allow for you to be meeting face-to-face and in person with your students. Instead, students are looking at various different web pages inside the classroom. So if you're going to use a visual medium, you might as well make the most of it. And instead of just going with a boring black and white text, try to find some ways to make it a little bit more creative and dynamic. You know, as part of my job, I frequently have to conduct peer reviews of the associate faculty in the Communication Studies Department. So I have an opportunity to see a lot of faculty members and what they're doing with the guidance section. And I'm disappointed when I see faculty members who simply just throw up a few paragraphs of simple text and expect that to be sufficient enough to engage the student in learning what they're covering. So some of the ways that you can go beyond the boring black and white text include incorporating some color. You know, pop your text a little bit with the use of color. Or perhaps add some images, you know, have relevant images related to the material that you're discussing about. Or perhaps, when appropriate, use some unique fonts that separate and distinguish certain pieces of text that you're talking about in your guidance. And what I want to do for a minute here is actually take you inside my classroom here to one of my guidances, just to give you a little bit of a look at. Okay, so here you go. I include an image at the beginning. That's just a simple welcome image, but if you read the text that goes along with it, I'm talking about cultural communication. So I intentionally used a sign that represented children from different cultural backgrounds there in the image. I also, for all my headings, use different color. So for instance, this week, all of my headings have the color orange. And what I do is I keep the color consistent for each week's guidance. So for instance, for this week 3 guidance, all the headings use orange for its color. But then in week 2, I may use blue or I may use green. So that way each week kind of gets distinguished by a certain color, but just a little bit of color in those headings not only helps distinguish it from the different weeks guidance, but it also helps break up the text a little bit more. So you can see here, whenever I've got a different heading, I use a color header of text for that. You also see I include some videos in my guidance as well. We'll talk a little bit more about video here later on. All right, now, some important things to remember as far as images and creativity go. The human brain processes images 60,000 times faster than text. So you can imagine how much more effective a visual image reflecting what you're trying to cover is going to be than a simple sentence. Also, web pages, it's been found, with images and videos draw on average 94% more views than ones with text only. And to give you a little bit of another example of it, here are 2 emails inviting an individual to a meeting. On the left side, you see one that's simply just text. And not only is it boring and uninteresting, but it's also got a case of information overload. There's so much information there. It's going to take a lot of time for the individual to read through all that and make sense of it all. Whereas you get the same basic information, but in a much more visually appealing way on the right side with some graphics included, and you get the basic key elements of what the message is trying to say there in the same amount of space. So again, if you can use images effectively, it's going to really help your students retain and be engaged with the material. Of course, you don't want to go too crazy. An overabundance of images is just going to cloud up and clutter up the page, and it's going to be something that does not look visually appealing, and thus your students aren't going to bother trying to sort through everything and try to figure out what the core information is on your guidance. All right, let's move on to the next C, which is closeness. And what I mean by closeness here is I'm using it as a synonym for immediacy. And if you've ever done any research on educational learning, immediacy is something that we should always be striving at in terms of that teacher-student relationship. Being able to form a bond with students through what we say is important. And there's been a lot of research done on closeness and immediacy. I reference the Baran, Correa, and Thompson article here, which shows that student satisfaction in learning have been found to have a positive correlation with teacher immediacy and social presence. So it really is important for their learning if you are able to make that close connection with them. And you can use your guidance as a way to help establish that. So some of the things that I do in my guidance to help build that closeness or immediacy is, for instance, greeting them at the beginning. As you saw, I had that welcome image there. And beyond the welcome image, I try to personalize it a little bit. So for instance, I may talk about if there's an upcoming holiday that week and just talk about the students about, you know, are you excited for that? So that way it's not just a standard boilerplate guidance that I'm putting up each week. I'm trying to connect with the students by talking what's going on in the world at that time with them. Or I also may put it in the context of the class itself. So if we're at week 3 or week 4, I may say, wow, you know, I can't believe how fast things are going in this class. We're already past the halfway point, something like that. So making that warm greeting right off the bat is going to help. Secondly, repeat availability. So I make it known to my students, both in my guidance and really through any communication, that I'm always available to them whenever they've got questions. So I frequently repeat, if you got questions, email me, contact me, use the Ask Your Instructor. Make them know that I'm out there and I'm willing to help them with whatever is going on. And that way then they can feel a little bit more at ease whenever they do actually have questions. Beyond asking general questions, I encourage questions and discussion with my guidance as well. So for instance, usually I try to structure my guidance around the assignments for that week. So if one of the assignments is a discussion forum topic, I begin talking about that discussion forum topic in my guidance. And as part of that, I not only offer my knowledge and expertise on the subject matter, but then I begin posing additional questions beyond what the discussion forum topic establishes. That way then they're thinking about it a little bit further, and they can even reference those particular questions as they're creating their posts in the discussion forum that week. And lastly, share experiences. So again, you're a human being, you've gone through experiences, whether it's in your personal life or in your scholarship, and you can use both of those to help enhance the content that you're creating in your guidance. So for instance, I teach communication and conflict. That's one of the courses I teach. So I may reference past conflicts that I've had with people in my life as I'm discussing, you know, the ways to effectively resolve conflicts in my guidance. And that way they see that, again, this is not just a robot or a computer posting up additional information about the course, but rather this is a human being who's had experiences and knowledge related to the topics that are being discussed. And again, when they see that, then they know how to be able to draw in from their own experiences and use those as examples when they're doing a writing assignment or talking in the discussion forums. All right, our third C is connection. And what I'm talking about here is not that connection between student and teacher, but rather having your guidance be connected with everything else that's going on in the classroom. So don't leave your guidance in isolation. Find ways to connect it with other aspects of your course. So for instance, as I mentioned before, I like to talk about the assignments that week. So get your discussion forums topics started by the content that you're introducing in your guidance. And if I go back to my guidance that I was showing you before, at the bottom of the screen here, there's a video. And this video, students are required to watch this video in preparation for the discussion forum topic that week. So not only is it available for them to view when they go into the discussion forum, but I've also embedded it here in the guidance so that way they can have another opportunity to watch it along with my additional thoughts on what is being said in that video. So again, you have that connection going on. Students know, okay, let me go to the guidance first, see what my instructor has to say, and then I can use that information then and move on to going into the discussion forums and creating my post. You can also provide a foundation for helping students with their writing assignments. So for instance, in the conflict course that I teach, one of the assignments requires students to describe a personal example of conflict by going through each of the 5 steps of the conflict stages that you go through when in conflict. So what I do is I talk about each stage from general terms, so that way they have a better understanding of what happens in each of those stages or phases, and then they can use that information again as they're creating their writing assignment. And lastly, remind students of all the additional services and tools that are offered by Ashford. So the Writing Center, the library, any of the webinars that are offered. If you can make references to those in the guidance, it reinforces the idea that there's a lot of tools available for students out there to help them learn inside the classroom and know that they're not just being left on their own to try to figure out how to accomplish or complete the assignments. All right, lastly with camera. So this is the one that will probably get a little bit of pushback from some people, but what I am suggesting is look for opportunities to consider not just using text, but rather get yourself in front of the camera and record yourself delivering information that you can include in your guidance, whether that's talking for the entire guidance and just simply posting that video, or whether it's having a combination of some text and some videos involving you talking. And why I'm promoting this is it goes back to that idea of closeness that we were talking about before. Allowing your students to not only see your face, hear your voice, and learn a little bit more of your mannerisms can really help them see you as a real person inside of the classroom. Of course, now, some people may be a little reluctant to have their face be seen on camera, in which case, simply look for ways that you can record your voice. You can create video where you've got something similar like this, where you've got a PowerPoint presentation, but at least you're talking it and they're hearing your voice. Or you may create animation or a little bit of a movie along with you talking. Something that at least gives the students a little bit more of a connection for them. So the medium can be engaging even if you aren't necessarily on screen. And the beauty is that with Canvas now, that functionality is relatively easy. So if you aren't aware, when you have the ability to go into Canvas and create a new announcement, you'll be able to see there's the icon right here for recording and uploading media. So you can click that and you have the ability to then just simply record and say whatever you want. Or if you've pre-recorded something, you have the ability to upload media and post it right into the guidance. So it really is a whole lot easier. You don't have to have a lot of technical expertise in order to be able to provide video for students now inside your guidance. All right. Now, lastly, before we finish things up, I know that for some courses that are here, there's standard guidance where you don't really have the ability to create guidance yourself. And for that, I understand. And what I would simply suggest to you is to look for some other areas inside your classroom that you do have control over the content, whether that is weekly announcements or whether it's in the feedback that you provide for grading. Those are other areas of your classroom where you can still apply these 4 C's that I've talked about here today and really personalize them a little bit more to make them engaging for the students. Again, the goal here is to really get students to be engaged with any and all of the material that you're providing in the classroom. I feel and why I focus on the guidance is because I think it's an overlooked aspect of the classroom, and it really shouldn't be, because it serves as a substitute for the weekly lecture, the daily lecture that you would typically provide inside a classroom, a physical classroom. So really look for any area you can in order to be able to implement these 4 C's of connection, closeness, creativity, and camera. And if you're able to do that, then hopefully then it'll be smooth sailing for you inside the classroom. So I'd like to thank all of you for your time for listening to me. I know I probably ran through a lot of that fairly quickly. I'll leave the remaining time here for any questions that you guys have about the 4 C's and creating effective guidance. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Adam. That was great. Lots of great information. I know I was writing some things down, and we have some activity in the chat as well. So Adam, I'll scroll up and kind of just direct you to some of the things that I have been seeing. Benita really thinks the new 4 C's would work well in a modern technology classroom setting. So definitely now with Canvas, lots of great opportunities to really expand on things. And then if you scroll down, you'll see Ramona talking about embedding those videos that already exist, instead of trying to reinvent the wheel.
Absolutely. Yeah, as you probably saw in my example, I will find a lot of videos, whether it's on YouTube or elsewhere on the internet, that has content related to what I'm discussing. And excuse me, I like doing that. Being a communication media individual, I like using TV clips if I can find it, and also movie clips, whatever it may be, and really kind of break up the text with the inclusion of those videos. So yeah, I think that is something that I enjoy doing, and I get a lot of comments from students who say, oh, I really enjoyed watching those, or sometimes they'll even reference what they saw in those videos in their discussion forum posts. And I see Teresa's comment, and absolutely, yeah, you want to make sure that you've either got a script to go along with it, or that the videos have closed captioning, so that way we are in compliance with ADA. Catherine, technically, yeah, any videos that you create should have closed captioning or some sort of additional script, so that way anyone who has or who doesn't have the ability to watch or listen to what's being said still has the ability to consume that content.
And spoiler alert, coming soon, our team is working on getting some information together to provide faculty with information about closed captioning, how to get the scripts together if you do choose to do video. So that will be coming soon as well.
Catherine, with your question about inserting an image, there are a couple of ways that you can go about doing that, depending on how comfortable your level is or your technical expertise. So for instance, you do have the ability to just simply choose the embed the image. I've got, hopefully you can see my screen here in doing that. If you're a little bit more familiar with HTML, you can also use that and switch over. So for instance, what I typically do is I will type out my guidance, and then I will put in all capital letters, insert picture here. And then when I go over to the HTML editor, I'll look for where that insert picture text is there and simply copy and paste the link for the image over that, and that'll insert the image in that way as well. So there are a couple of different ways that you can go about inserting one that should hopefully be fairly easy for you to do so. And thanks, Catherine, for sharing that as well. Yeah, that's good information that people can use to help them with images and videos as well. Other questions that people have about dynamic, engaging guidance? How many people are already doing some of the suggestions I've made here already inside their classroom? Yeah, you know, the announcements I find really can be an extension of the guidance. So for me, I still create my guidance, but in addition to that, I do create a weekly, at least one weekly announcement that just kind of previews what's coming up in the week ahead. So those two really go together. I think that the guidance is really an elaboration on the material, whereas the welcome weekly announcement is more just sort of a primer for getting the students ready for what they need to do. But in both of them, I try to make efforts to make them as engaging and dynamic as possible. Yeah, but Nina, I definitely do this as well. Like I said, when I'm doing peer reviews of faculty members, I really look at their guidance and try to make some of these suggestions to them if they're not doing that already.